Warning, this video contains spoilers for The Batman. Here's everything you might have missed in The Batman. Riddle me this, riddle me that. Did you catch every last Easter egg in The Batman? Well, considering its runtime, there are quite a few in this latest take on DC's Dark Knight. And if you didn't, don't worry because we have you covered with an exhaustive breakdown of all the Easter eggs, hidden details, and comic book references that you might have missed. And as always, if you prefer to read all about it, Rosie Knight has you covered over on Nerdist.com. But with that said, obviously to talk about the Easter eggs in The Batman, we need to spoil what happens in The Batman. So if you haven't seen The Batman yet, this is your spoiler warning for The Batman.
Any of this mean anything to you?
Alright, let's get into it, shall we? Let's start with two of the major and much discussed stylistic influences on this movie. David Fincher's Seven and Zodiac, both serial killer stories that involve gruesome murders, creepy clues, and a game of cat and mouse between killer and detective. They clearly had a deep impact on Matt Reeves' filmmaking process with The Batman. And much like Zodiac, The Batman also begins with a grisly killing that sets the tone for what's to come. Seven also opens with our detectives analyzing a nightmarish crime scene as well. But speaking of the Zodiac, Paul Dano's version of the Riddler is much more intimidating than the spandex-clad version portrayed by Jim Carrey in Batman Forever. This Riddler is modeled after the real-life Zodiac killer, the serial killer who terrorized Northern California in the late 1960s. From the costume he wears to the cryptic cipher and messages he leaves to taunt both the police and the general public, the parallels are intentional and genuinely haunting. During that unsettling scene when the Riddler murders Mayor Don Mitchell Jr., you can see a newspaper article on the wall referencing the Maroni drug bust. The Maroni in question is infamous crime boss Sal Maroni. First appearing in 1942's Detective Comics 66, Maroni isn't just a long-running thorn in Batman's side, he's also the one who threw acid into District Attorney Harvey Dent's face, which led to that scarred survivor becoming the maniacal villain Two-Face. In terms of larger comic book influences, the ones most cited by director Matt Reeves are Batman Ego, Batman Year One, and The Long Halloween. Darwin Cook's Batman Ego, a one-shot from 2000, sees Bruce Wayne and Batman in a psychic battle with each other about whether or not they're making a difference in Gotham City. And much like this movie, it ends with Bruce resolving for Batman to be a symbol of hope as well as fear. And while this film takes place in the second year of Bruce's Batman project, many visuals and moments are straight out of Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's iconic Batman Year One story. From Selena Kyle's background, her short hair and general costumes, to the drifter disguise that Bruce Wayne uses to slink through the streets of Gotham, the influence on this story and the Batman is undeniable in each and every frame. The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale takes place during the second year of Batman's career. Batman, Jim Gordon, and Harvey Dent try to solve a series of murders targeting the Falcone crime family that take place on holidays. With this film's emphasis on targeted serial murders and the first one happening on Halloween night, The Long Halloween is infused into this movie's DNA. Speaking of Halloween, though, the film also references John Carpenter's horror classic Halloween as well. From the way the Riddler emerges from the shadows like the Shape in the opening murder, to how the car begins to fog up when he strangles Gil Colson in his car, Matt Reeves is clearly a fan of the horror master's work. Moving on, in Batman's first appearance in the movie, we see him beat the living daylights out of a bunch of face paint-wearing gang members who are about to attack a subway passenger. And while we don't see Robin the Boy Wonder in this movie, there is a Tim Drake in the crowd. One of the gang members with only half his face painted is actor Jay Lycurgo, who plays Tim Drake, the third iteration of Robin on the show Titans. Batman's oft-repeated line to the subway gang, "I am vengeance," is itself an homage to Batman the Animated Series. The full phrase, "I am vengeance, I am the night, I am Batman," comes from the Nothing to Fear episode where Batman had to overcome hallucinations from Scarecrow's fear toxin. When Batman arrives with Detective Jim Gordon at the Mayor Mitchell murder scene, we learn that Gordon is from the 39th precinct of the Gotham City Police Department, and this is an homage to the very first Batman story that was published in Detective Comics number 27 in 1939. Next up, we come to the Riddler's greeting cards that he leaves at the crime scene. They aren't just creepy clues for the Batman to solve, each one teases other villains in the Dark Knight's Rogues Gallery. The first one features an owl, and it calls to mind the Court of Owls, the shadowy secret society that runs Gotham City from behind the scenes. The second features a mad scientist that bears a striking resemblance to the nefarious Hugo Strange. The third one features a woman wearing green who some think is Poison Ivy. The next one is just a pair of eyes against a black background, and that could evoke the Cheshire Cat and thereby the Alice in Wonderland-inspired criminal Mad Hatter. Lastly, we have a child with a puppet that calls to mind the dynamic duo of the ventriloquist and Scarface. And while these are just subtle references for the time being, I would love to see Matt Reeves take on that devious puppet Scarface in a future Batman outing. Now, rather than Wayne Manor, which was converted into the orphanage where Edward Nashton grew up, Bruce lives in Wayne Tower in the heart of Gotham. And not only does he have his trusty butler Alfred, but another housekeeper named Dory. Most likely, this is a nod to Aunt Harriet, Dick Grayson's aunt, who first appeared in 1964's Detective Comics 328 and later on in the Batman 66 TV show. Following Alfred's supposed death, she served as the caretaker of Wayne Manor in the comics. And speaking of Alfred, the letter that he received from the Riddler revealed that Wayne Tower is located on Kane Street, which is an homage to Batman co-creator Bob Kane. And while there might be another Easter egg that I missed, I'm gonna go ahead and retroactively say the thumb drive, that's a nod to Bill Finger. Gotta balance those scales after all. Also in that shot of Alfred opening the letter, you might notice a familiar statue. There's a bust of Shakespeare, which on the Batman 66 series contained a hidden button that would reveal the bat poles leading down to the Batcave. Next up, during the car chase with the Penguin, we get to see Batman's sweet new Batmobile in action. This muscle car version seems heavily inspired by the Batman 72 artwork of Francesco Francavilla, and you can see other aspects of Francavilla's aesthetic in the high collar that separates Batman's cape from his cowl as well. And speaking of Penguin, not only does he do his business from the Iceberg Lounge, a nightclub that dates back to 1995 Detective Comics 683, but he also ironically calls Batman by one of his most infamous nicknames. When Gordon and Batman interrogate the Penguin about El Rata Alada, he calls these non-Spanish speakers the world's greatest detectives, which is one of Batman's many monikers. But my favorite part of that scene is when they leave this mobster all tied up, forcing him to waddle Penguin-like in order to move. Moving on, the Riddler's explosive revelation about the Wayne family's ties to the mob was canonized in Jeff Johns and Gary Frank's 2012 comic Batman Earth 1. In that story, we learned that Martha's maiden name was Arkham and she dealt with mental illness just as the movie alleges as well. Likewise, Thomas Wayne running to be the mayor of Gotham, which we also saw in Joker, seems to be straight out of Earth 1 as well. Now, the idea that Bruce Wayne's parents are connected to the mob also has a precedent. The video game Batman the Telltale series explored Thomas Wayne's connections to organized crime, and it gives Bruce the option to try and reconcile his idea of his parents with the apparent reality. As for Thomas Wayne treating Carmine Falcone for a gunshot wound, we saw that happen both in the Long Halloween comic and the animated movie as well. Now, perhaps most eyebrow-raising, though, is the mention of the journalist Edward Elliot who Carmine Falcone killed to stop him from revealing the truth about the Wayne family. Thomas Wayne tried to pay Elliot hush money, and we see the word hush written in all caps on the screen. In the comics, Edward Elliot was the great-grandfather of Thomas Elliot, the Batman villain better known as Hush. Thomas Elliot was a childhood friend of Bruce Wayne's who, out of jealousy, became the supervillain Hush. He worked with the Riddler and other members of Batman's rogues gallery to try and take Bruce down once and for all. One of the biggest surprises in the film is that Selina Kyle's father is actually the mobster Carmine Falcone. In the sequel to The Long Halloween, Dark Victory, Selina suspects that Carmine is her biological father, but she can't find any evidence to confirm it. But during their fight in Carmine's office, we see Selina scratch Carmine's face in identical feline fashion to how she wounds this mob boss in the Batman Year One comics. Next up, as Batman brings Carmine outside the Iceberg Lounge, the mobster mocks the Dark Knight, calling him Zorro. This is a nod to Batman canon, where Thomas and Martha Wayne took their young son to go see the Mark of Zorro the night they were tragically killed by Joe Chill, who had no chill. The mask-wearing vigilante had a major impact on both Bruce Wayne and his creators Bob Kane and Bill Finger. They took inspiration from Douglas Fairbanks' version of this iconic character. After that, when Penguin tells Carmine to enjoy his night in Blackgate, he's referencing the other infamous institution for Gotham City's criminals. This prison first debuted in 1991's Detective Comics number 629, and it's for the few non-criminally insane people that Batman goes up against. Every so often, there's a normie. Inside the Riddler's apartment, we see that old Eddie Boy has been using social media and chat rooms to rally his followers to commit crimes for his twisted cause. This also evokes another Batman story involving the Riddler and anonymous chat rooms. In Detective Comics 845, Paul Dini and Dustin Nguyen crafted a murder mystery revolving around a chat room. In one scene, we see Batman chatting with other amateur detectives online to try and crack the code. And among others in that chat room are Riddler himself, Batman, and yes, you guessed it, Detective Chimp. You know, that old chat nut. Now, during Batman's battle with the Riddler army at Gotham Square Garden, he injects himself with a green liquid that is most likely adrenaline to help him recover after taking a gunshot point blank to the chest. The bright green color has some fans believing that this could be Venom, the performance-enhancing substance most associated with Bane from the comics. First appearing in Batman Legends of the Dark Knight number 16, this addictive substance amplifies the user's physical strength. Batman used it himself during that story arc, but somehow I don't think this is the green herring that many fans believe it might be in the Batman. Now, the Riddler's dastardly plot to flood Gotham City is actually straight out of the pages of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Zero-Year storyline. With Gotham left divided, devastated, and in dire need of help, power vacuums will inevitably arise and villains like the Penguin will fill them. This calls to mind the No Man's Land story arc that came out of 1998's Cataclysm. After an earthquake tore Gotham apart, criminals and villains carved the city up into different territories, making quite the headache for Batman. And it seems more than likely we'll see this angle explored in detail in the inevitable sequel. But perhaps the biggest talking point when it comes to future theories, though, is the unseen Arkham prisoner that makes friends with the Riddler in his cell. Played by Barry Keoghan, this mystery character is in fact the Joker, as confirmed by director Matt Reeves. But it's one that might not be the clown prince of crime that we all know and love. And the textured look to the Joker's face is very reminiscent of Frank Quitely's cover art for the Joker #1 as well. As we mentioned in our ending breakdown on Friday, this also raises questions about whether or not we could see an adaptation of the War of Jokes and Riddle storyline at some point in the future. This 2017 story saw Joker and Riddler teaming up to take down the Batman during his second year of crime fighting. Ultimately, they wound up turning on each other because each one wanted to be the person who kills the Batman. They turned Gotham into a war zone in the process, leaving Batman to clean up the mess. Next up, we come to the final farewell between Batman and Catwoman, and this feels straight out of the ending of Telltale's Batman series, where the two share an emotional goodbye as Bruce chooses crime fighting over leaving town with Selina. And another detail from the Telltale games, Riddler's penchant for making Saw-style death traps. He is seriously twisted in that game. As for Selina, she says that she's leaving for Bloodhaven. First introduced in 1996 as Nightwing #1, Gotham's sister city served as Dick Grayson's base of operations after he left Gotham to pursue the villainous Blockbuster. And last but not least, we have the post-credit scene of the movie, which, as we explained in our video breakdown on Friday, is a teaser at the end of the film that directs you to rataalada.com. Thankfully, no gruesome thumb drive is required to access this website and its contents. And while connecting to the website, there are a number of fake IP addresses that are actually references to iconic Batman stories. In order, they reference Detective Comics 27, the first appearance of Batman, Batman #1, the Dark Knight's first solo comic in 1940, Detective Comics 58, the first appearance of the Penguin, Detective Comics 140, the first appearance of the Riddler, Batman 405, part of the Year One storyline that influenced the movie, Batman 16, the first appearance of Alfred, Batman 258, the first appearance of Arkham Asylum, and lastly, March 4th, 2022, the release date of this movie. Now, as for the reward the site now links to, there's an encrypted message from the Riddler as part of an augmented reality game that's been going on for months leading up to the film. The message, when decrypted using a cipher made by fans, reads, "You think I'm finished, Bat? Perhaps you don't know the full truth. Every ending is a new beginning. Something is coming." As for what that something is, we'll just have to wait and see. But the site seems to be slowly loading that something, so we're keeping our fingers crossed for a first look at one of the Batman tie-in series for HBO Max, or maybe official confirmation of the Batman 2. Anyway, folks, there you have it. That is everything we spotted in the Batman. We'll have plenty of other deep dives, theories, and videos about the Batman in the days ahead, but in the meantime, let us know, what did you think of this movie? Did you spot any Easter eggs that we missed?
Haven't a clue.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.